the Watt 120N Plus camera, and he has used it many times, and several times he's asked me for advice on how to set it up, and then he said, well, maybe we ought to do a presentation on this at the conference. And then I've also worked into this some guidelines that have come apparently to me in working with the Recon group folks. So they're using Malin cams, or Malin cams, however you pronounce that. And so I've tried to work in just a general set of guidelines from the learning that we've had in looking at lots of different videos, the light curves, kind of the things that went right and the things that went wrong. So let's go forward. So currently we have many of our IOTA members that are purchasing integrating CCD video cameras. And you know, it expands our range of occultations that they can observe. People are trying to observe TNO occultations. So we're going to run into this issue more and more as we move forward. So at some point we probably ought to establish some written guidelines, but for now I'll just talk through this, and then folks that have ideas on how to maybe document this would, you know, those ideas will be welcome. So the CCD video cameras, the integrating ones, have a variety of settings, and I'll put those settings in parentheses because there are so many I can't even get my hands around them. I recently got a Malin cam for testing from the Recon group, and even that looks daunting to me, so we'll see how that goes. But we think that establishing a set of guidelines will help our IOTA members get the best possible results when they submit videos from integrating cameras. So right now the cameras that I have seen used are the Watt 120N Plus, and of course the N, which is the PAL version, the PC 165 DNR, the Mentron, which I think is equivalent to a Watt 120N Plus under a different brand name, and then the Malin cam, which is kind of a unique implementation of the integrating video camera, and has some unique problems associated with it too. And then one side note is that however we publish any guidelines, and even from this talk, it's really the observer's responsibility to understand their own camera, how to run the controls, the operating characteristics. There's too many different combinations of settings for us to come up with a blueprint to do them all. So that's just a caveat on the sign, is that each observer needs to understand their own equipment. Now, then I also have the caveat that if in doubt, ask for advice from an experienced observer prior to your observation. And what I would suggest is that you ask for advice from someone that has a similar camera that knows how to run it. So for example, I have a Watt 120N Plus, so anyone that's listening that would like advice on how to run that, you know, you can come to me. I'd be happy to help, but don't come to me for a PC 165 DNR because I won't know what to do. Mentron the same. I do have a Malin cam, or Malin cam, however you pronounce it, that I will be testing, and I may be able to help folks with Malin cams. All right, so there are 4 important settings. The shutter setting, which you can change the shutter to a fast setting or a slow setting typically, or you can change at least the speed of the shutter. Gain, typically there's either a manual or an automatic gain control. Gamma, which is the overall linearity of the output, can sometimes be off or manual, low or high if set. We'll cover that. And then for the color cameras, you can have a color mode. Typically, sometimes you can switch them to black and white, or maybe they're always in color. So we'll talk about each of these as individual guidelines. So I'll put this diagram up. This is a typical Watt 120N plus control box. So when I talk about shutter settings, in the context of the Watt 120N plus, we have slow settings, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 settings. And so for example, the 1 setting is at a 1/30th second frame rate. There are no fields. Both fields are exactly the same. Then we go to a 15th second, an 8th second, quarter second, half, 1, 2, 3, and 4 second integrations, which is the highest you can get with the 120N plus. On the high side, then at the 1 setting high side, we have 1/30th of a second frame rate, but we also have 1/60th of a second field rate. Then we go to 1/20th of a second, 1/20th of a second, 1/250th, 1/500th, 1,000th, and 1/2000th, if I remember all of those correctly. But the idea is that these are just faster shutter speeds within the NTSC framework. We're still recording frames at a 30th of a second and fields at a 60th of a second. But if you're at a 1/250th of a second setting on this shutter speed, your shutter is only open for 1/250th of a second while the field or the frame is running. So in these settings, I don't recommend using these, because in these settings you're actually losing data. Your shutter's closed part of the time, and basically you have no data when the shutter's closed. So I'm always recommending to our observers that they don't use these settings for occultations. You might use them for something else, but not for occultations. This knob in the center is the gain control, and it's a manual gain control on this camera, which I like. And you can set it to low gain or twist it to high gain, and that allows you to, regardless of what your shutter setting is, you can increase what you see on the screen. You can increase the sensitivity of the pixels. So typically I'll always start out at high gain and then start adjusting my shutter settings to get maximum visibility of the stars. And then there's an iris setting here that doesn't work on mine because I don't have a variable iris on my camera. And then there's a gamma setting. This gamma setting controls gamma off, meaning that your gamma is at 1.0, meaning you have a linear response from low brightness up to high brightness on your pixels. I'm going to advance here now that you know the general framework. Just one other side control on this particular camera is if you have this shutter setting straight up towards this little arrow at the top, if you press this side button, you can integrate for as long as you want. you can integrate for 30 seconds. Typically, for my sky brightness and what have you, I'll blow out my image, but that's just an extra control there for taking pretty pictures sometimes. All right, so similar to the Watt 120 on the PC 165 DNR, you have a little series of buttons on the side, and the buttons say enter, up, down, left, right. And then the OSD control board is on-screen display control board, and it has a series of menu selections that you can change. And this is where it gets complicated, because all of these selections change things. So you have a lens and exposure, white balance, day-night control, DNR on, that's the dynamic noise something is on or off. All of these things do things, and I'm not an expert in this camera. I don't pretend to know what they all mean. You have a shutter control, automatic gain control, different settings. Sense up, I have learned, is the acronym for integration. So when Sense Up is in auto mode, it will automatically change the integration on you. And the Malin Cam has this feature, and it's very troubling, because when the Malin Cam is in a Sense Up mode, auto, sometimes you might have a quarter-second integration, sometimes you might have a half-second integration, sometimes you might have a 30th of a second integration. So it actually varies things on the fly, which is very troublesome, and I'm going to try to find a way around that for that camera. There's a background control. This one says off, and then there's a white background control, which this one says off. But man, oh man, there's a lot of stuff that you can do with that DNR that can mess things up, and I've seen every possible combination of videos with them messed up. So hopefully we can get somebody with expertise in the 165 DNR that will give us a good set of clean guidelines for that. But what I'm going to say is going to apply to all of these cameras if the person running it knows what all these controls do. Okay, so let's talk about shutter guidelines first. And shutter guidelines apply to the Watt camera. This will apply to Sense Up in the Malin Cam and in the PC 165 DNR cameras. So in general, we want to operate the shutter in a manual mode so that it's not an automatic, so that it doesn't just willy-nilly change the Sense Up or change your integration setting as the occultation is occurring. That's the worst case situation. We don't want that. Okay, so if the shutter mode is in manual, we want to operate the shutter at the fastest possible speed that we can get a stable target star image. And by stable, I don't mean that the target star has to be constantly visible. If there's some atmospheric instability, it can twinkle, it can blink in and out, but it should only just twinkle. It shouldn't be constantly going in and out. It should just be a stable image. So if we operate at the fastest possible shutter speed, it gives us the best time resolution for disappearance and reappearance timing. And that's really important if we want to capture other photometric phenomena such as double star step events. or little satellite dropouts and things like that. So when Dave Harold talked this morning about the Via Puri event, you know, we have a pretty solid looking satellite step event, but there's only one data point because they were integrating at a sense up of 16. They were integrating 16 frames. They could have been integrating at 2 or 4, and they would have gotten you know, that much more data to show what kind of an event it really was, rather than just one step drop in brightness. Okay, so further guidelines on the shutter is that we want to avoid subframe shutter speeds. Those are those ones on the fast side that I was showing for the Watt 120N Plus. So if you use the shorter speeds, less than 1/60th of a second, some people have used those to reduce the target star brightness, and that is we don't want to saturate the target star. If we saturate the target star, we can often lose data in very low mag drop event situations. And some people have used high shutter speeds to not saturate the target star. And what that does is we lose information while the shutter is not open. So the fastest we want to go is that field rate, or 1/60th of a second. Then we've constantly got all the data we can possibly collect. And I mentioned operating the shutter in manual mode because, like the Malin cam, when the shutter is in automatic, it's constantly juggling that shutter. I've seen rates change from one frame to 16 frame integration rates within the same video, and it just makes it impossible to properly block integrate the data back into a reasonable data set. Okay, next we'll talk about gamma guidelines. So the gamma is the relative brightness of the faint objects in the field of view to the bright objects. And so no gamma means that the relative brightness is linear, and that's what we prefer, especially when we're trying to do photometry. So some people are doing photometry of these near-Earth asteroids as they zip by the Earth. Hristo has a Tangra routine set up so you can do photometry. And in those cases, you want to have your gamma linear, or in the Watt it would be off. And some of these other cameras might be a different setting. So with the manual gamma, we get a linear setting. The gamma of 1.0 is linear. That gives us our best photometry. In the Watt, we can also set it to a setting of low, which is 0.45 gamma, or high, which is 0.35. And sometimes that's needed to enhance the visibility of the target star for a given shutter setting. So what I typically do is I'll set my gamma to high so that I can see the star in the video as clearly as possible, get a stable star at the fastest shutter setting. Typically for me, I can get down to 12th magnitude with a high gamma at a slow 1 setting consistently. So that's a pretty good setting for me. And I have a 12-inch telescope, so everybody else is going to be a little different, but that's what you have to do, is try to get your shortest shutter speed where you get a stable image that you can get a good occultation light curve from. So the one thing in gamma is don't set gamma off or at a 1 level if it means that you have to integrate at a 1/4 of a second, when instead you could set gamma high and integrate at a 1/30th of a second, because we want the higher time resolution if at all possible. We'll talk a little bit more about that at the end as to when you wouldn't do that. Okay, so there the gain control, gain guidelines is that any cameras with manual gain control should be operated in manual gain control mode. The reason for that is automatic gain control cameras will change gain on the fly. And so you won't really know if something that's happening on your screen is because the brightness is dropping, or is it because the gain control is changing. People like Scotty Degenhardt, who are trying to run a highly controlled set of photometry on the Jupiter satellites, Io and Europa and those satellites, trying to get those brightness changes down to tens of milli magnitudes. You don't want your automatic gain control messing you up on that, so you want to run in manual gain whenever possible. I always set my gain to max unless it's saturating my stars. So really bright stars, 5th magnitude, 6th magnitude stars, I can run at a 1/30th of a second for shutter, and I can turn my gain down so that I don't saturate the star. By saturating the star, I mean we don't want the pixels to be at their maximum value. We want them to be below maximum, so in case there are some low mag drop effects, we can actually see those in the pixel brightnesses dropping up and down, rather than if the pixels are all at max, there can be a slow or a small drop in magnitude, and we never see it because the pixels are all driven to max and any changes are up above where we're actually able to see. In the Malin cam, the automatic gain control should always be off because, like I mentioned, under AGC, this camera is constantly changing the shutter settings. Color mode guidelines. The Watt camera is a black and white camera, so this doesn't apply. The PC 165 DNR is a color camera. If possible, it should be set to black and white mode. One of the Malin cams that I reviewed is a color camera. I have seen odd results come from that camera in that the person that read those that light curve out, I think only got one of the color channels to come out, and so the data looked really bizarre. So if you're recording in color mode and then you read out only one of the color channels, you're losing some of your data. So that's another possible area for problems. If we get them all set to black and white mode, then we know we're capturing all of the data on all of the channels, regardless of how they're read out to the PC or what the codec's doing or that sort of thing. Okay, so then just some observational guidelines. If we're looking at asteroidal occultations, these events are typically short. The disappearance or reappearances are typically instantaneous. We want to use maximum time resolution, and we want to use the, when I say lowest possible shutter speed, I mean the fastest possible shutter speed that's consistent with getting a stable combined asteroid plus target star image. Some of the videos that I've seen that came back, like from the recon group, for example, these folks were setting their integration rates high enough so that they could see the asteroid. And in fact, their target star was actually being saturated. And we don't need to do that. We want that if the combined asteroid plus the target star image is bright enough to be stable, that's and then our shutter speed is as fast as possible, we're going to get the maximum information from our event. For lunar double star observations, step events are expected, so we want maximum time resolution. And we want to avoid, again, saturation if at all possible. The other end of the spectrum is TNOs. These events are typically very long in duration. They can be 60 seconds, 90 seconds, 120 seconds. And the target stars themselves are typically faint. The TNOs often are even fainter. So we need to use longer integrations to get stable combined TNO plus target star images. The TNO does not need to be visible. So on these, you're going to set your integration to as long as you need to get down to the magnitude that you need to get a stable combined TNO plus target star image. So conclusions are that our integrating CCD video cameras allow observers to attempt a broader range of event magnitudes, but proper camera settings are important to getting good light curves. And if people use these, I'll call what I've presented today kind of guidelines, but they're more intended to be, this is kind of how you should do it if you know how your camera's working type of guidelines. And again, if in doubt, ask somebody who's pretty experienced in the type of camera that you have before you invest a lot of time and energy in your observation, especially new observers, or if you get a new camera, try to get some advice from somebody that's already run that camera before you try for a critical light curve. And you may say, well, gee, I know that, that's only common sense, but I've gotten lots of videos where people have got a video of a critical event and we're trying to get the data out, and the settings were wrong. So even as much as we think it's common sense, that's what's going on. So that's my presentation, and I'll click this presentation off and see if you have any questions.
We've got clap, clap, clap going on over here at Canada. That's just great information. It's nice to have somebody codify it and put it all in one place so that we can see it and consider it and integrate it into what we're doing. Questions from the audience here? I see none. That was still just great information, Tony. I appreciate it. I get lost in the process every time. See, Terry, you may be our PC-165 DNR camera. I think Ted Swift may be ahead of me on that now, but yes, I have one and I like to use it. But you're right, it gives you headaches when you start looking at the data to make sure that you've got something useful. So there's just a lot to think about every time something like that is used. Are we ready for the next presentation? I see Ted is back.